Alright, so there are two things you need to know really quickly before we begin. Number one, this is not going to be a comprehensive review of every facet of the factory, right? I'm not going to be talking about how to place down transportation belts. I'm not going to be talking about, say, what a grinding unit is or what it does, right? I'm not going to be telling you how to find ferrium. So if there are any factory basics you don't know, there are a couple of things you can do. Number one, you can check the simulations page for instructions on how to use specific machines and what specific production machines do. You can also check the tutorials page for very basics like how to place down belts and how to connect things to power. And for everything else, you can check the database for things like how to construct specific machines or what specific items are and what they're used for and how they're crafted, production formulae and production chains. All of that can be found in the database. The second thing you need to know is that I am not going to be giving you the answers in this video, and I will not be giving you blueprints. So if your goal is just to skip the factory entirely, you're gonna have to go somewhere else. Don't worry, there are like a million other places on the internet you can go to find blueprints. You will have absolutely no trouble finding blueprints. Alright, so let's get started. The A-side's gonna be broken up into different chunks, different pieces of advice. I call them lessons in my document just to sound a little bit more professional, but they're just pieces of advice. Alright, so the first piece of advice, the first lesson is probably gonna take the longest because I really think it's that important, and that is to always think in terms of transport belts. So what does this mean? This means that whenever you place down a machine in your factory, you always want to be thinking, how many input belts do I need and how many output belts do I need? Alright, so let's demonstrate this with a very simple example. Alright, let's say I want to make amethyst fiber. Okay, so let's say I have absolutely no idea where to start. Where would I start? Well, amethyst fiber is a material, right? So I would probably want to go into the database and search up amethyst fiber and find the file. Once I find the file on amethyst fiber, I can see that it needs a refining unit, and while I'm at it, let's pin up the formula so that I can always see it in the top right of the screen. Okay, so now that I have a refining unit down, now what I have to ask is how many belts and of what material are going into the refining unit, and how many belts and of what material are coming out of the refining unit. There is one more piece of information that you're missing before you can answer this question, which is, of course, how much does a single transport belt transport? Well, if you interact with any transport belt, you can see on the pop-up window that it says 0.5 units per second. And you can think of it this way, 0.5 units per second, but for reasons you'll find out soon, I prefer to think of it as one item every 2 seconds. And remember this number, okay? One item every 2 seconds. That is the basic unit of speed for all transport belts. There are no speed upgrades for the belts in this game. Whenever you place down a transport belt, it's going to be one item every 2 seconds. Okay, and so again, I'm going to pose this question to you. How many transport belts are going to go into the refining unit? And how many transport belts are going to come out, and what material is going to be carried on both the input belts and the output belts. And this isn't a rhetorical question, right? I'm asking you to pause the video if necessary. It might not even be if I waffle on for long enough, but try to come up with the answer yourself. I really think that it will help you out if you at least attempt to come up with the answer yourself, and then I give you the answer and you see if you're right and you see if you're wrong. It's okay to be wrong, but it's not okay to not try. That was super cheesy. I might cut that out. Alright, ready for the answer? The refining unit, as we can see, produces one amethyst fiber from consuming one amethyst ore every 2 seconds. So on the input side, the refining unit consumes one amethyst ore every 2 seconds. And, conveniently enough, the transport belts transport one item every 2 seconds. So it turns out in this case that the answer is pretty simple. The answer is that we're going to need one transport belt of amethyst ore going in. And on the output side, it's very similar. The refining unit produces one amethyst fiber every 2 seconds. Again, transport belt transports one item every 2 seconds, so that's one belt of amethyst fiber on the output side. So we connect the refining unit up like so, wait a little bit, wait for it to run, and look at that, it works. That was underwhelming. I'm willing to bet that most of you, if not all of you, would use one transport belt on the input side and one on the output side anyway, even if you didn't have any math to back up that decision. So what does this really tell us? Well, it tells us that even though the refining unit allows us to use up to 3 input belts and 3 output belts, using more than that isn't actually necessary. So I could technically connect up 3 transport belts of amethyst ore on the input side and 3 belts of amethyst fiber on the output side, and, you know, it would technically work, but what our little bit of math tells us is that doing so is actually really inefficient. Well, it's not inefficient so much as it is not more efficient, you know what I mean? Even though it looks like more things are happening, because there are 3 belts instead of 1 on each side, it's actually not more efficient than just having 1 belt. And in fact, if you look closely, you can see this, right? If you look at the input side, you can see that the amethyst ore is actually clogged. You don't have the materials flowing constantly into the refining unit the way we had with the 1 belt in, 1 belt out setup. And then if we take a look at the output side, we can see that the 3 transport belts on the output side carrying amethyst fiber, they don't look very full. In fact, they look about 1/3 full each. Funny how that works. Yeah, so essentially what's going on is that you're using way more inputs and way more outputs than you need, and a very easy and cheap trick to tell whether that's happening or not is, in this game, you want a constant flow of materials. Unless your depot is completely full, and that means that your entire production line is clogged up, what should be happening is that materials should be flowing into all of your machines and flowing out of all of your machines consistently. Okay, so let's get slightly more complicated than this. What if I wanted to produce amethyst bottles? So, as before, if I don't know what to do, I'm gonna check the database for the formula, right? Amethyst bottle. Pin up the formula, I see that it needs a molding unit, so let's put down a molding unit. And now, just like before, the question is, how many input belts do I need, and how many output belts do I need? And additionally, what material is going to be carried on the input and output belts? Okay, got your answer? So, on the input side, the molding unit needs 2 amethyst fiber every 2 seconds, and since a transport belt carries, I hope you remember this, 1 item every 2 seconds, we need 2 belts of amethyst fiber on the input side. And then on the output side, we're making 1 amethyst bottle every 2 seconds, and again, transport belt, 1 item every 2 seconds, so that's 1 transport belt of amethyst bottles on the output side. Well, I must say, it's very convenient that the molding unit needs amethyst fiber when we have amethyst fiber being produced right now, almost as if I planned it that way, but that couldn't be, right? It couldn't be. What am I even doing? Okay, so yeah, let's just hook it up. What am I even doing, dude? What am I even doing, dude? Okay, yeah, let's just connect it up like so, and start producing amethyst bottles. Did you notice the mistake? I really hope you noticed the mistake. Okay, so obviously what I've done right now is an incorrect setup. Ignoring the fact that it's pretty obvious what I've done wrong, there are a couple of ways to tell that the setup is wrong. As we've previously figured out, the molding unit should be creating 1 full belt of amethyst bottles. But let's look at the output belt. Does this look like 1 belt to you? No, it's half a belt of bottles. So this must mean that the molding unit is running at half efficiency. And the second hint we have is this blue sleeping symbol that periodically shows up above the molding unit. I'll talk a bit more about this later, but basically the sleeping symbol usually means that the machine is running properly but is just waiting on more input materials to start production again. Well, if you haven't caught it yet, hopefully this helps you out a bit. The problem is that both transport belts that are connected into the molding unit are coming from the same refining unit. As we already figured out, the molding unit needs 2 transport belts, and there are 2 belts connected, but they're both connected to the same refining unit. And the refining unit, as you'll remember, only makes 1 belt of output. So basically what happens is that if you connect 2 belts from the same refining unit, each belt is only getting half of a belt load. So effectively, the molding unit is only getting 1 belt. Luckily, the fix for this is actually very, very simple. We just add another refining unit to the setup and wait a bit. And as you can see, now we're producing bottles at full speed. Now I do just want to say really quickly that running a 1-to-1 between refining unit and molding unit isn't wrong. I'm just saying that it's a lot less efficient. And this is especially true if you're running two of them at the same time, two of these refining into molding setups in parallel. If you're doing something like that, you can really save up on a lot of space if you just connect both refining units into the same molding unit. Alright, let's move on. Let's do another example. This time I've done a little bit of the legwork for you, right? I've already looked into the database, and what I'm doing right now is I am transporting buck flour into a shredding unit, and I'm shredding it into buck flour powder. A warning symbol has shown up, a different one from last time, but a warning symbol nonetheless, and you can tell that something's wrong because the buck flour is not constantly flowing into the shredding unit. And as I've mentioned earlier, generally for intermediary products like buck flour and buck flour powder, you do want the materials to be flowing constantly. So clearly what's going on is that one full belt of buck flour is too much for the refining unit. Or is perhaps something else going on? Alright, here's the formula on screen. My question to you is the same. How many belts and of what material are going into the shredding unit? And how many belts and of which material are going to be exiting the shredding unit? Alright, so the formula is 1 buck flour into 2 buck flour powder every 2 seconds. Okay, so on the input side, we have 1 buck flour every 2 seconds. That's 1 belt of buck flour powder. That's what we have. I wonder what the issue is then. Well, let's take a look at the output side. On the output side, we have 2 buck flour powder every 2 seconds. That's 2 belts of buck flour powder. So you see what's going on in this setup. The reason why the buck flour is backed up is because the output cache is clogged. In theory, if we add another output belt to the shredding unit, everything should clear up. So let's try that and just give it some time. Okay, well, would you look at that? It looks like it works. The additional issue is that if I ever needed a formula that used 2 belts of buck flour powder and I didn't know about this ratio, well, not only would I need 2 shredding units, but also if I didn't split the buck flour input, just the raw plant input, I would need 2 plant cycles to supply those 2 shredding units. And that's a lot of space being used. That is a lot of space. Well, let's talk about plant cycles. So, the mass production of plants comes from 2 machines. There's the seed picking unit, and then there's the planting unit. So right now, I have 1 seed picking unit and 1 planting unit, and I want to make buck flour. Let's take a look at the formulas and see what I need to do. So, in the seed picking unit, it looks like it consumes 1 buck flour to produce 2 buck flour seeds every 2 seconds. Really quickly, do the math yourself. Okay, so hopefully you're a pro at this already, but if not, just practice, I guess. So the seed picking unit consumes 1 plant and creates 2 seeds every 2 seconds. That's 1 transport belt of plants on the input side, and 2 transport belts of seeds on the output side. Alright, well let's take a look at the planting unit. The planting unit consumes 1 seed and turns it into 1 plant every 2 seconds. That's 1 belt of seeds on the input side, 1 belt of plants on the output side. So, where do we start? It's kind of like a chicken and egg situation, right? The planting unit consumes seeds and produces plants, and then the seed picking unit consumes plants and produces seeds. Let's just say, to make things simple, let's start with the seed picking unit. Plants are going to come into the seed picking unit from the depot. The seed picking unit is going to need 1 transport belt of plants, and it's going to create 2 transport belts of seeds. Well, how many planting units can be supplied by 2 transport belts of seeds? Well, that's pretty simple. It's 2. Because each planting unit needs 1 belt, so if you have 2 belts, you can supply 2 planting units. So let's just place down 2 planting units and belt in the seeds, and now what's going on is that each of our 2 planting units is producing 1 belt of plants. So that's 2 belts of plants in total. Now do you see what we can do here? Since the seed picking unit requires 1 belt of plants, I can take one of our 2 belts of plants from the planting unit and pipe it back into the seed picking unit. And when I do that, it becomes a self-sustaining loop, do you see? And this is very important because basically every formula in the factory requires one plant or another, either buck flour or sand leaf or citron. The basic idea is that you make one self-sustaining loop with one planting unit and one seed picking unit, and then the second seed picking unit output goes into a second planting unit, and the output of the second planting unit becomes your output. It's time for example number 5. Let's step things up a notch. We're going to be putting everything together and doing denominator adjustments. Isn't that fun? Basically, so far, all of the production formulae I've given you to work with, all of the formulae I've asked you about, come in multiples of 2 seconds, right? 1 buckflower seed every 2 seconds, 2 amethyst fiber every 2 seconds, stuff like that. It's very easy to come up with how many belts you need when that's the case, because 1 belt transports 1 item every 2 seconds. I mean, you basically don't have to do any math at all. It doesn't get much more complicated than that, but it does get a little bit more complicated. So here's a fun one. Let's talk about buck capsule C. If you check in the database, you'll see that buck capsule C is produced by the filling unit. The formula is 5 amethyst bottles and 5 buckflower powder every 10 seconds. Formula's on screen, and the question is the same as always. How many transport belts do we need on the input side, and of what material? And how many transport belts do we need on the output side, and of what material? Well, unfortunately, each of the inputs comes in the form of 5 units every 10 seconds, which isn't in the blank units every 2 seconds format that makes everything easy. But it's actually very simple if you remember that the flow rate is basically just a fraction. And the fun thing about fractions is that we can multiply or divide the top and the bottom of the fraction by the same number and get the exact same fraction but in a different form. So in this case, obviously, what we want to do is divide the top and the bottom of this fraction by 5. So if you divide 5 units by 5, you get 1 unit. And if you divide 10 seconds by 5, you get 2 seconds. So 5 units every 10 seconds is the same thing as 1 unit every 2 seconds, or 1 belt. Alright, so on the input side we have 5 amethyst bottles every 10 seconds, which is the same as 1 amethyst bottle every 2 seconds, or 1 transport belt of amethyst bottles. And then also on the input side we see 5 buckflower powder every 10 seconds. Same thing, that's 1 every 2 seconds, or 1 transport belt of buckflower powder. And then on the output side, we see 1 buck capsule C every 10 seconds. Okay, so let's divide the bottom by 5, that's 2 seconds. Let's divide the top by 5, and we get 1/5 of a buck capsule? What? Okay, so hopefully this should go without saying, but if ever you find yourself in a situation where you need a fractional amount of belts, always round up, don't round down. And just like that, over the course of, well, I've been recording for 45 minutes. I don't know how long this video will be by the time I shave that down, but over the course of however long that was, we have successfully made the lowest tier meds. Isn't that fun? Now obviously the production of the lowest tier meds is not going to help you into the endgame, but hopefully you understand this idea of thinking in terms of transport belts, and hopefully that helps you make more important and more complicated materials like cryston components or buck capsule A's. Because even though the production formulae get more complicated, and even though you need more transport belts as you progress towards more complicated materials, the underlying principle of thinking in terms of belts to understand ratios remains the same. So I really hope this helps. But we're not done yet. Oh no, we're not. You know, I'm a little bit tired of Valley 4, but I could use a change of scenery. Let's go to Wuling. Let's talk about fluid pipes. So the Wuling region introduces these fluid pipes. It's a new gimmick in the factory. A couple of Wuling machines need fluid pipe inputs or outputs to run. These include the Forge of the Sky, the fluid filling unit, and the reactor crucible. But let's take fluid planting units as our example for this video. There are a couple of differences between the fluid planting unit of Wuling and the decidedly not fluid planting unit of Valley 4. Let's ignore the water input for now and just focus on the seeds. So for this example, let's say I want to create Yajin out of Yajin seeds. I'm sure you already know the question I'm about to ask. How many belts of input and of what material does the planting unit need? And how many belts of output and of what material will the planting unit produce? Again, ignore the water for now. Well, as I'm sure you can see, the formulae for growing Jinsao and Yajin are slightly different from the Valley 4 plant counterparts. For this example, Yajin, the planting unit needs 1 Yajin seed every 2 seconds. That's 1 belt of Yajin seeds on the input side. And on the output side, it produces 2 Yajin. Not 1, 2. That's 2 belts of Yajin on the output side. Well, that's interesting. As I'm sure you remember, the planting unit for Valley 4 needed 1 seed as input, but only produced 1 plant as output. Having 1 belt of input and 2 belts of output kind of messes with our plant cycle, doesn't it? Well, let's take a look at the corresponding Yajin seed formula in the seed picking unit. I'm gonna skip the part where I ask you the question and pause. I'm sure you can tell where this is going. The seed picking unit needs 1 Yajin and produces only 1 Yajin seed every 2 seconds. That's 1 belt of plant as input, but most crucially only 1 belt of plant as output. Not 2 belts, 1 belt. So our modified planting cycle for Wuling will look like this. It'll only need 1 planting unit and 1 seed picking unit. But that's not all, of course. Now we have to talk about the water input. So the only thing you really need to know about Wuling fluid pipes is that they're effectively just transport belts for liquids. So the planting unit needs a water input. That's a liquid. Water's a liquid. So my question to you is, how many, not belts, but pipes. How many pipes do you need to supply 1 fluid planting unit? Well, as is the case with our very first example, there is missing information. Obviously, the additional piece of information that you need is how fast do fluid pipes transport water? Well, as is the case with the transport belts in Valley 4, you can just interact with the fluid pipes to find out. You interact with the fluid pipes, check the pop-up window, and it says 2 units per second. So, going back to our planting unit, we can see that it requires 1 unit of water every 2 seconds. So, how many pipes of water does a planting unit need to run? Okay, hopefully that was pretty quick. The answer is 1/4. There are 2 ways you can go about doing this math. One of them is to change the denominator of the planting unit. So a planting unit needs 1 unit of water every 2 seconds. You divide both sides by 2, that's half a unit of water every 1 second, and since the pipe transports 2 units every 1 second, that's 1/4 of a pipe. Alternatively, you could do a denominator adjustment on the pipe. The pipe transports 2 units of water every 1 second. If you multiply both sides by 2, you get 4 units of water every 2 seconds. And since the planting unit needs 1 unit of water every 2 seconds, as you know, that is 4 planting units that can be supplied by 1 pipe, or 1/4 of a pipe required to supply a planting unit. So in theory, I should be able to run 4 of these plant cycles simultaneously using only 1 pipe. Conveniently enough, I have a pipe already set up for that shot at the beginning of this section. So let's just use that. Usually I do a manifold setup where I just put all the splitters in series, but since that takes a little bit longer to get up and running, instead I'm going to do load balancing, which is splitting the 1 pipe and then splitting each. I'm going to talk about this later. Why am I talking about this now? I'm going to talk about this later. Okay, so all 4 cycles are connected to the pipe, and let's just wait for it to run. You all could see where this is going, right? Come on, of course I made a mistake. There's no way I wouldn't make a mistake. So, here's my question to you. What did I do wrong? Here's a hint. You might not know. That's a good hint, isn't it? You might not know the answer. No. I haven't exactly given you all the information that you, strictly speaking, need to definitively answer the question, but if you want to open up the game yourself and mess around with it, or if you have some sort of idea as to the type of information that I've withheld from you, you might be able to come up with the answer. What did I do wrong? Alright, do you have your answer? Let's take a look at the fluid pump. Interacting with the fluid pump brings up a pop-up window where we can see that the fluid pump supplies 1 unit of water every 1 second. As you'll remember, fluid pipes transport 2 units of water every second. So, we actually need 2 fluid pumps to fully supply 1 pipe. That's the problem. Conveniently enough, I have another fluid pump directly next to it, so let's turn that one on. It pushes me over the power limit, but that's okay. I only need it for a short while to do this demonstration. Let's connect the 2 pipes from the 2 pumps and wait. And as you can see, now all 4 plant cycles are working at 100% efficiency. There are, of course, more examples I could go through, but believe it or not, all of this has just been lesson 1, and I have 6 more to go through. Don't worry, the rest will be much shorter than this one, I hope. So with that said, you ready for lesson 2? Lesson 2 is take care of your power consumption. Power production and power consumption is pretty important. So important, in fact, that you can access your power status from basically anywhere. Your power situation is at the top of the screen whenever you're in the map, or whenever you're in AIC mode, which can just be accessed by pressing tab whenever you want. If we take a look at this small readout, it's pretty easy to tell what this is saying. The fraction on the left is, of course, our power production and power consumption situation. The number on the left is your current power consumption, and the number on the right is your current power production. As you may have surmised, you want the number on the right to be greater than the number on the left. If for whatever reason your power consumption should exceed your power production, don't worry, you still have time. Your entire factory will keep running as long as you have battery. Your battery status can also be found on the readout. As your factory runs on battery power, the gauge decreases. And let's just watch what happens when the gauge hits 0 and your battery runs out. Any day now. Man, you guys have it so lucky, you know? I can use a little bit of movie magic to speed up the footage so that you don't have to wait for, I don't even remember how long it was for the battery to run out. But while we're waiting, do you want to know another bit of movie magic? I don't actually have the game open right now. I'm recording this audio obviously right now as I'm speaking, but I haven't recorded the gameplay footage for the pipe example. I have recorded the gameplay footage for all of the other examples, but that happened after I recorded the audio for those examples. And I have recorded the footage of the battery draining because I think it just naturally happened as I was playing through Wuling. I'm like, oh, I could grab this footage right now. I don't have to like manufacture some sort of like power overage. But I mean, I think I was scared that I would never get into a situation where I would have no power, but I think my current power situation in Wuling is exactly 1800 power being consumed, 1800 power being produced, so it would be very easy to push myself over that limit. The speed at which your battery drains depends on how much over the limit you are, and so if I only go a little bit over, like I am in the footage that you're watching right now, it takes a while. I think I checked out a little bit while recording this, went and did my Arknights dailies or something, I don't know. It's a couple of days ago, don't really remember. You guys want to see a final bit of movie magic? The battery's gonna be fully drained in 3, 2, 1, now. Man, how did I time that? Wow, that's crazy. Okay, so as you can see, when your battery runs out and your power consumption is over power production, what happens is that all of the machines that require power shut down. This situation, where all of your machines shut down, is commonly known in the biz as, not good. Yeah, you want to avoid this. So let's take a step back and talk a little bit about how you get to this situation. Well, obviously there are contributing factors that increase your power consumption and increase your power production. On the consumption side, whenever you have a machine that includes your mining rigs, that includes your zip lines, that includes your turrets, that includes your AIC factory machines, whenever they're connected to power, they will increase your power consumption, even if the machine isn't being used. So if you have just a refining unit in the middle of nowhere and it's not doing anything, but it's connected to a pylon, it's still going to be consuming power. There are two ways you can make the machine still stand but not consume power, and that is to either disconnect it from a pylon or like remove the nearby pylon, or you can go into the machine settings and turn it off, or you can go into the pylon settings and turn it off from the pylon settings. But keep in mind that when it's off, it doesn't work. Like, obviously, so yeah. And then on the production side, you have thermal banks. You start with a little bit of power production, I think 200, just for having a core AIC area, but anything above that needs to be produced by thermal banks. Luckily, thermal banks don't consume power. So even if your battery's at 0, you can still put things into thermal banks and increase your power limit and start recharging that battery. Also, very crucially for dealing with power outages is that your belts keep running even when there's no power. So you can do an automated setup where you're using transport belts to transport materials into the thermal banks and produce power automatically that way. So let's take a look at the thermal banks and see what kind of materials it can use to produce power. Well, as you can see, it's a very limited selection. It's either originium ore or it's batteries. We'll talk about the batteries later. For now, let's talk about the originium ore. As you can see from this formula, the thermal bank consumes 1 originium ore every 8 seconds. So my question to you is, how many belts— Oh, you thought we were done. No, we're not done. I'm still gonna be asking you about belts. Don't worry, I'm still gonna be asking you about belts. How many belts of originium ore do you need to supply 1 thermal bank? As you can probably tell, 1 thermal bank needs less than 1 full belt of originium ore. So I guess my real question is, how many thermal banks can be supplied by 1 fully stocked belt of originium ore? Okay, so the thermal bank consumes 1 originium ore every 8 seconds. So if you divide the top and bottom of that number by 4, you get 0.25 originium ore every 2 seconds. And since a transport belt transports, say it with me, 1 item every 2 seconds, that's 1/4 of a belt being used to supply 1 thermal bank, or in other words, 1 fully stocked transport belt of originium ore can supply 4 thermal banks. So really quickly, let's talk about how you supply 4 thermal banks with 1 belt. Splitters. But if you're looking online, you'll see a couple of different setups for the splitter. In general, they either boil down to putting all the splitters in a line, or taking the original belt, splitting it into 2, and then taking each of those 2 and splitting those into 2. So the first setup that I mentioned is, I've heard it's been called a manifold setup, probably because of this pipe thing. But there is one big problem with this setup, and that is, well, let's trace the flow of materials. So you start with 1 full belt at the bottom. You start with 1 full belt. When that belt hits the first splitter, the left branch gets half a belt and the right branch gets half a belt. Well, the right branch just goes into the thermal bank, but the left branch hits a splitter. And when the left branch hits a splitter, it splits into 2 more branches, and both of those branches only get half a belt times 1/2, or 1/4 of a belt. And then the left branch of that gets split again, so each of those 2 branches after that is getting 1/8 of a belt. So as you can see, the first thermal bank in this setup is getting half a belt, the second one is getting 1/4, and the last 2 are only getting 1/8 each. Now luckily, it's not quite that simple. In fact, this setup does work, but it takes a little bit of time to work. The key reason why it works is because the thermal banks don't have unlimited storage. The first thermal bank, the one that gets half a belt of material, well, it still can only consume 1/4 of a belt of material, so soon its input cache is gonna clog up. So what happens when the input cache of the first thermal bank fills up is that it can no longer receive half a belt. It can only receive 1/4 of a belt because that's how much it's consuming. So the second, third, and fourth thermal banks collectively are receiving 3/4 of a belt. So when that happens, the second thermal bank will be receiving 3/8 of a belt, which is more than 1/4, and the third and the fourth thermal bank will be receiving 3/16 of a belt, which is less than 1/4. But then, since the second thermal bank is receiving more than 1/4 of a belt, slowly its input cache will fill up, and then it will only receive 1/4 of a belt because that's how much it consumes. And then the third and the fourth one will share half a belt, and they will get 1/4 of a belt, and now everyone has 1/4 of a belt. The other setup is known as load balancing, and this does not run into the same issue because the one belt is being split into 2, but then both of those branches are being split evenly into 1/4 and 1/4. So all 4 thermal banks are receiving 1/4 of a belt just right from the get-go. There's no need to fill up input caches to make sure that there are overflow materials or anything like that. In fact, it's so simple that I probably should have talked about it first, but yeah, it's a bit too late. Maybe I can do a bit of editing magic and swap the order, but it probably won't make sense. Anyway, so although load balancing is much simpler to explain, they both work. But do keep in mind that if you do choose to go with a manifold setup like this one, it's going to take a bit of time for everything to even out, since the setup needs full input caches on the first 2 thermal banks to function properly, and that takes quite a bit of time. So until that happens, you may notice that your power production fluctuates, and that's normal, that's what happens. In the grand scheme of things, it isn't really a big deal, but I thought it'd be good to just mention it. But of course, the thermal banks don't only take originium ore, they also take batteries. And if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering, is it better to use batteries? Or is it better to just use the raw ore? I mean, logically speaking, surely the batteries are more efficient, right? There's no way the game would have you go through the process of building a battery production chain only for it to be less efficient. But how much more efficient is it? Let's find out. Well, first we need to start with a bit of a baseline. The baseline is going to be, of course, originium ore. So, one output of originium ore can supply 1 belt of originium ore, which can supply 4 thermal banks. And a thermal bank running on originium ore produces 50 power. So a full belt of originium ore supplying 4 thermal banks produces 200 power. So that's going to be our baseline metric when discussing efficiency of batteries. Remember that raw originium has an efficiency of 200 power for 1 originium output. So let's talk about the batteries. We're going to start with the lowest tier battery, the LC Valley battery, and then move up the list. So starting with the LC Valley battery and checking the formula in the thermal bank, this is where thinking in terms of belts starts to break down. Or not break down so much as just be less convenient than it has been in previous examples. So the thermal bank consumes 1 battery every 40 seconds to produce 220 power. Well, to do a denominator adjustment to get this in terms of belts, you divide both sides by 20, and yeah, you get 1/20th of a belt. This is not a very fun number to work with, especially when in the past it was always a whole number of belts, but let's just see the math through. So our next question is, how is the LC Valley battery produced? And just like everything else, you can find this out by checking the database. LC batteries are made by the packaging unit, with an output rate of 1 battery every 10 seconds. If you divide the top and the bottom of that fraction by 5, that's 1/5 of a belt of output. Well, conveniently enough, 1/5 of a belt is the same as 4/20ths of a belt. So since a thermal bank consumes 1/20th of a belt and a packaging unit produces 4/20ths of a belt, one packaging unit at 100% uptime can supply 4 thermal banks. And just to make things a little bit faster for future examples, the same thing applies for SC and HC batteries. So now our real question is, how many outputs of material are required to run one packaging unit producing LC batteries at 100% uptime? Well, let's take a look at the formula and work backwards. First, the packaging unit needs 1 belt of amethyst parts. Amethyst parts are produced by the fitting unit. 1 belt of amethyst parts is produced by 1 fitting unit, and 1 fitting unit needs 1 belt of amethyst fiber, and we know how to make 1 belt of amethyst fiber. Going back to the packaging unit, it also needs 10 originium powder every 10 seconds. That's 2 every 2 seconds, or 2 belts of originium powder. Originium powder is produced by the shredding unit, and each shredding unit consumes 1 belt of originium ore and produces 1 belt of originium powder. So we're looking at 2 shredding units consuming 2 belts of originium ore and creating 2 belts of originium powder. So our total production chain looks something like this. We need 2 outputs of originium ore and 1 output of amethyst ore to supply enough batteries for 4 thermal banks, and each thermal bank consuming LC batteries produces 220 power, so in total that's 880 power. So that's our ratio. Remember, with raw originium ore, the ratio was 200 power for 1 originium output, and for LC batteries, the ratio is 880 power for 1 amethyst ore output and 2 originium ore outputs. Well, that's a problem. How are we supposed to compare amethyst outputs to originium outputs? It's really an apples to oranges situation, right? I mean, after all, originium can be used for a lot of things, and amethyst is kind of useless, I'm not gonna lie. It's used for making really, really low tier stuff, and that's it. So it would stand to reason that an amethyst output is less valuable than an originium output. But how much less valuable? Well, to answer that question, we have to talk about opportunity cost. I actually did a quote search in Google for Endfield and opportunity cost, and the first results was this Reddit post. This Reddit post has already done some opportunity cost calculations for us. You guys can go and check out the post and check his math yourself. I never really got around to it because I got too distracted by this power per second column. Why is he talking about power per second? Power is already in terms of per second. Per second has already been done for you. If you're doing power per second, you're actually doing energy per second, and that's never a requirement, right? Power is always. Oh boy, I just realized. Am I gonna have to explain how power works? Oh, that's gonna be fun. Oh boy, how am I gonna do this? Okay, think about it this way, right? Okay, so you can kind of think of power as a measure of energy speed. If you imagine that all of your energy in your AIC factory is in a big bucket, if you connect something up to power, like say a grinding unit that needs 50 power, that's a lot like opening up a drain at the bottom of the bucket. And the speed at which energy flows through that drain is the power consumption. So if you have a grinding unit that consumes 50 power, that means that the energy in your bucket is being drained at a rate of 50 per second. And then on the other side, if I have, say, a thermal bank consuming orogenium ore, which produces 50 power, that's like pouring 50 units of energy per second back into the bucket. So you can imagine that if you have a bucket of energy and 50 per second is being drained out and 50 per second is being poured in, the level of energy in the bucket overall is going to stay constant. But then if you have more drains than you have faucets, or if your power consumption exceeds your power production, what happens is that the level of energy in that bucket is slowly going to go down, obviously because you're using more than you're making. So obviously what you want is to have more power production than power consumption. You can think of that like pouring more energy into the bucket than you're draining out. And in a situation like that, the energy level of that bucket is going to slowly go up. So anyway, that's why power per second doesn't make sense, because power is not the resource being consumed. Energy is the resource being consumed, and power is a measure of how fast that resource is being consumed. For the sake of this video and for the sake of time, yeah, imagine that, being time conscious in this video, oh boy. We're just gonna assume that the opportunity costs of using each mineral is equal. They're not, but we're gonna assume they are for simplicity's sake. So what this means is that I'm gonna be treating one amethyst output as equal to one orogenium output. So effectively for this demonstration, we have 3 outputs, 1 amethyst, 2 orogenium, providing 880 power. This is equal to 293 into third power per output of ore, which is significantly better than the 200 per output from raw orogenium ore. So yes, the math says that the LC battery is in fact more efficient, and significantly so, than simply using raw orogenium ore. I'm going to be skipping over the math for the SC and HC batteries. You can do them yourself if you want. In fact, I encourage you to. I mean, you're going to have to be making HC batteries eventually, you know, might as well find out how many outputs it takes. Anyway, for the SC battery, which is the second tier of battery, on the power production side, we have 420 power per bank times 4 banks, which is 1,680 power. The SC Valley battery requires 2 ferrium ore outputs and 3 orogenium ore outputs, or 5 outputs in total. So this maths out to 336 power per ore output, which is not only more efficient than the 200 per output for raw orogenium ore, but also more efficient than the 293 and 1/3 power per output from the LC battery. Well, what about the purple tier battery, the HC battery? Well, on the power production side, we have 1,100 power per thermal bank times 4 thermal banks, or 4,400 power in total. And on the consumption side, one packaging unit making HC Valley battery requires 4 ferrium ore outputs and 6 orogenium ore outputs, or 10 ore outputs in total. So this maths out to 440 power per ore output, which is, as I'm sure you all guessed, more efficient than all of the other options. So yeah, the jury's in. Math says that making HC Valley batteries and using that for power is ideal. And then of course there's the Wuling battery. I'm not going to talk much about this. It is just overwhelmingly the best option if you're in Wuling. In fact, I think my entire Wuling factory, as well as my entire zipline network, is being powered by literally just one thermal bank running on Wuling batteries, and that's the lowest tier Wuling batteries. I shudder to think how much power the Wuling region is gonna need when you're at the end of the region. Oh boy. Well, you remember how I said that the future lessons were gonna be shorter? Yeah, that was all lesson 2. It's, I think it's gonna be shorter, but not by much, so Sorry about that. At least now you know the difference between power and energy, and that's useful in day-to-day life. Sometimes, I think. Probably is, right? Lesson 3. I really hope that this is gonna be shorter. Lesson 3 is learn how to find problems. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is going to make a perfect factory on their first try. Very early on in the game, I made a very quick battery production setup just to leave it overnight to run while I slept. So I finished up the production chain and closed the game, and like an hour later when I was in the shower, I realized that I hadn't actually connected the packaging unit back into the PAC. So all of the batteries had nowhere to go. So after that, I really quickly logged back in, and sure enough, the packaging unit was all clogged up. More recently, in Jingyu Valley, I connected all of my ziplines and all of my mining nodes up to the sub-PAC through a single Serenite tower. And the fun thing about Serenite towers is that if you move the Packer's sub-pack out of range of the Serenite tower, it automatically disconnects. This is not an issue for normal relay towers, but for whatever reason they decided to make it an issue for Serenite towers, so yeah, the entire night, the entirety of Jingyu Valley was unpowered, except for the 2 Originium mining nodes south of the sub-pack. Those were fine. So the idea is that, as is the case with basically everything, you're not going to get it perfect first try. But if you're anything like me and really value those hours of passive production and passive income, there are a couple of steps you can take to just really quickly check if your factory is working properly. The first really easy thing to check is the warning symbols that I mentioned earlier, like half an hour ago at this point. Those warning symbols show up above your machines when they're not running, and they tell you the reason why they're not running. As I mentioned earlier, the sleeping symbol means that the machine isn't running because it's waiting on more input. So if you make a line of, say, amethyst bottles, or more realistically batteries, and you see that the molding unit or packaging unit is periodically showing up with that sleeping symbol, what you know is that it's not getting enough materials. That basically tells you that you need to add more inputs, and then it's your job to figure out where those inputs are going to have to come from and what material is going to be inputted. Think in terms of belts. That will really help you with doing that. Another very common symbol is the orange unplugged symbol. I really hope you know what that means. That means that the facility is not connected to power. So whenever you're done with a production line, always go through and make sure that all of your machines are connected to power. Just do a quick sweep, and if there's a problem with power, just drop a pylon. A warning symbol that's very likely not going to catch you off guard is the gray X. That means that the facility is turned off. And the only way a facility can be turned off is if you turned it off. So I really hope nobody looks at their factory and goes, "What? My facility has a gray X, it's turned off. How did that happen? You turned it off." That's what happened. I guess one very understandable instance where that might catch you off guard is if you turned a machine off to save on power because you were over power, but then you made another power production setup, but then you forgot to go back and turn the machine on, so it's just sitting there off. The final warning symbol I want to talk about is the red circle with a dash through it. It's kind of like a no symbol, and this is kind of like the opposite of the sleeping symbol. Basically, the idea behind the red no symbol is that the machine does not run if its output cache is filled. There are a couple of possibilities that might lead to a situation like this. One is the buckflower powder example that I brought up earlier. Buckflower powder shreds to a 2-to-1 ratio, so you need 2 output belts to fully clear the output cache. And if you don't have that, then you're going to be getting that red no symbol. Another plant you might experience this with is sandleaf. Sandleaf shreds into sandleaf powder in a 3-to-1 ratio, so you need 3 output belts to clear the output cache fast enough. But then sometimes you just won't have a use for 3 full belts of sandleaf powder, and I've seen some people solve this by belting whatever sandleaf powder they're not using into a protocol stash to accumulate in the depot, or maybe they use it somewhere else, I don't know. Honestly, I just don't bother with it. I just see how many belts of sandleaf powder I need, and I just use that many belts. And sometimes this means running a shredding unit with fewer than 3 belts, and it's whatever. But if you choose to do what I do, just keep in mind that you're going to be seeing that red no symbol pretty often. The second situation where you see the red no symbol is when your depot is full. This is very normal, and you can tell when this is the case when the belts are also not moving. Generally, if it's an issue of, oh, you just don't have enough output belts, the output belts will still be moving, but you just don't have enough. But if the output belts are clogged, and that's the reason why the output cache in the machine is clogged, then that just means that your depot is full. Or it means that your output belt isn't actually connected back into the depot or a protocol stash, so check that too. And then the third situation where you find the red no symbol is just, sometimes it just happens. I get this a couple of times when I start a production chain and I start it running, but then I build the production chain as the earlier parts of the chain are still running. So usually those machines fill up on their output cache, but then I belt it into the next machine. Even though the output cache is sending out materials and receiving materials at the correct speed because I used the correct number of belts, it'll still show up with the red warning symbol because, I don't know. It's not a big deal if that's the case. Just be aware of it, I guess. There's another useful tool for identifying potential problems, which is the AIC Economy tab. You can access the Economy tab from the pause menu. It's at the bottom of the circle to the right. If anybody knows the hotkey for it, please let me know. I am very tired of opening the pause menu and clicking on the button, but I don't know the hotkey for it. In the Economy tab, you can see every single material that your factory could possibly produce or consume, as well as a graph of production and consumption, real values for production and consumption, and theoretical values. Unfortunately, it seems like the devs don't really like my think in terms of belts strategy. So in the Economy tab, everything is displayed not in terms of belts, but in terms of units per minute. So here's a question to you. Yeah, we're not done with questions. How many units per minute is the same as one belt? Well, one belt transports one item every 2 seconds, and a minute is 60 seconds, so if you multiply the top and the bottom of the belt fraction by 30, you get 30 items every 60 seconds. So one belt transports 30 items per minute. So generally, you will see in your Economy tab, especially in the theoretical values, that these numbers are going to come in multiples of 30. Basically, in the Economy tab, you're looking for two things, but one of them is way more important, and that is you want your production to always be above your consumption. This isn't like a hard and fast rule. You can definitely run your production lines consuming more than you produce, but it is very, very important in two specific situations. One of those is originium and batteries, because that's your power, and as I hope you remember, if your battery dies, everything dies. So you really, really want your battery and your originium production to be above your battery and originium consumption. The other really important thing to look out for, especially for me, is plants. As you can see, I produce all of my sandleaf in the corner of the main AIC area, and then I ship it to the other sub-factory areas for use. And if you look online, you're gonna find a lot of people who do something similar to me. And if you choose to do something like this, it's very important that you make sure that you're producing more sandleaf than you're consuming. The second thing to look out for, and this really isn't that important, but you should be aware of it, is that theoretical values should be the same as your experimental values. If it isn't, you don't need to freak out or anything like that, but you should be aware of it and keep an eye on that material to make sure that it isn't being underproduced and bottlenecking your chain, especially for sandleaf. Sandleaf is very important. Unfortunately, the theoretical values aren't super good. They kind of assume that all of your machines are running at 100% uptime, even when that's not true. For instance, here's a very plausible setup where I have 3 sandleaf outputs going into 3 shredding units, and each only outputting 1 belt of sandleaf powder. In a real situation, these 3 could be in completely different areas depending on which facility needs sandleaf and where it's located, and it doesn't always make sense to have 1 sandleaf going into a shredder and then belting all 3 sandleaf outputs just across your entire factory area. So in this situation, since sandleaf shreds into 3 sandleaf powder, but each shredding unit only has 1 belt of output, each shredding unit is only running at 1/3 speed. And since each shredding unit at 100% uptime consumes 1 sandleaf, if there are 3 of them at 1/3 speed each, the 3 shredding units together are consuming a combined total of 1 sandleaf belt. But then if I look at the theoretical values, it says that I'm consuming 3 belts of sandleaf when that's just patently not true. So that's one reason why your theoretical values might be different from your experimental values. Another very common reason is because your depot is either full or empty. For instance, here in Wuling, if you're producing only 90 units per minute of ferrium ore and consuming 120 units per minute of ferrium ore, and your depot is out of ferrium, well, the experimental value is still only gonna say 90 units per minute being consumed because that's all there is to consume. There is no more to consume. But the theoretical value tells you that if theoretically you had 30 per minute more ferrium input, you would still only be breaking even, but production and consumption would go up from 90 and 90 to 120 and 120. On the other end, in value 4, you can see that I'm producing 560 originium per minute, and I'm only consuming 540 per minute. But then the experimental value shows that I'm only producing 540. Well, why is that? That's because my depot is full of originium. And when your depot is full of originium, the output caches in your mining rigs start backing up. And when the output output caches of your mining rigs are fully backed up, then your mining rigs stop working. And what that means in practice is that you're only going to produce 540 per minute because that's how much you consume. If you're curious, these are the maximum production values of raw ore in Valley 4. 560 originium per minute and 1080 ferrium per minute is enough to supply 3 packaging units making HC batteries at 100% uptime and 3 filling units making purple meds at 100% uptime. So if for whatever reason you happen to be looking through someone else's endgame factory and you see that they're producing 3 production lines of batteries, 3 production lines of meds, that's why. And last but not least, if you're trying to preempt issues in your base, whenever you're finished making a production chain, just do a full sweep of the whole thing and see if anything's wrong, right? Make sure that everything's connected to power, make sure that everything's connected to their belts, make sure that all of your belts are supplying the right item, that's important, make sure that all of your machines are running, make sure that the output belt of the final machine in the production line is going back into the depot, and if you want to check the economy tab to make sure that it's showing up there in the theoretical or even experimental values, then please do so. Also make sure to check that you're not over the power limit. If you are, you're going to get a very annoying voice saying, "Warning, insufficient power output." So I think it's very difficult to accidentally go over power unless you're over-consuming batteries or you're over-consuming originium, and that bottlenecks your production. Alright, well, somehow, despite my not entirely best but still pretty good efforts, this video is shaping up to be way longer than I'd hoped. Luckily for all of you, with the conclusion of this third lesson, I have gotten through what I consider to be the most important aspects of the factory. So, are you ready for a lightning round? Alright, lightning round, lesson 4. Keep everything in one line. Technically, you can do fancy layouts where you send materials back into the depot and then you take it out in a completely different area, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. I mean, I do that with my factory, but there's one potential issue with doing that, which is that it's much more difficult to tell if there's a bottleneck or not. When everything's in one line, you can kind of tell that everything's flowing constantly through the machines and into the final machine in the production line, or it's not, and if it's not, there's an issue. But when it's split up, it's a lot more difficult to tell if maybe you're missing like a refining unit or a grinding unit or whatever. So whenever possible, keep your production in one place and keep it in one line. Alright, lightning round, lesson 5. Do not mix your lines. Alright, so here on screen I have 2 buckflower cycles. One buckflower cycle is sending buckflower into a protocol stash, and the other one is sending it into a shredding unit, and then 2 belts from the shredding unit are going into that same protocol stash. And you can see that both cycles are clogged, right? The belts aren't moving and everything has that no symbol, but if you check the depot, you'll see that I'm only full on buckflower powder. I'm not full on buckflower itself. So why is the buckflower clogged? Well, it's because they're all sharing the same protocol stash, and since the buckflower powder has filled up all 6 slots of the protocol stash, and the protocol stash can't send those into the depot because the depot is full, the buckflower can't be sent into the depot either, even though it could be if it were being sent into a different protocol stash. So that's what I mean by don't mix your lines. Alright, lightning round lesson 6. Don't worry so much about your specific layout. If you look online, you're gonna see a lot of, oh, super compact setups. Don't worry, you don't need to do that, right? You have plenty of space in your factory. You don't really know that much about Wuling so far, but in Valley 4, you are very much limited by how many raw mineral ores you can mine up every minute. That really is your limiting factor. You have enough wall space in all of your factory areas combined to send all of those minerals out with tons of room on the wall to spare, so you don't need to worry if you use a little bit of wall space for like a sand leaf output. It's not a big deal. Also, if you have enough power for this, you can use protocol stashes instead of depot loaders to send items back into your depot. Protocol stashes can be placed anywhere and they can just teleport items straight into your depot, so you don't need to worry about belting it all the way back onto the wall. That being said, you can't go crazy with it. Like, remember the refining unit setup at the beginning with 3 belts in, 3 belts out? Yeah, that's way too much wall space being used. Don't do that. It's not only wall space that you don't have to worry about, it's space. You have plenty enough space to do spaghetti belts or whatever you want to do. In fact, I'm running the optimal 3 production lines of purple batteries, 3 production lines of purple meds, and I have this massive space in the corner of my factory that I've been using to do demonstrations in this video. So yeah, do not feel pressured to be super compact or super space efficient. You don't need to do that. Alright, lightning round lesson 7. Experiment and figure out what works for you. There's some things that you can only figure out through a little bit of experimentation. Like, obviously everybody knows that you press caps lock to enter the isometric top-down view, but did you know that if you're dragging out a pipe and the corner isn't in the place you want it to, you can press R to rotate it? Actually, you might know that one too. The prompt is right there, but the game never really draws attention to it. Also something that you probably know, but you might not, so I'm saying it anyway. Belt bridges and pipe bridges are automatically placed down whenever you cross a pipe or cross a belt. On the topic of things that most people know, but probably something like 1 or 2 people don't, and so I'm spending time talking about this for the sake of those people, did you know that you can hold Control to multiplace? Also, you can go press X to enter bulk select mode and move and save and... Wait, the game tutorializes this. Why am I saying this? Okay, moving on. Another big part of figuring out what works for you is using external tools if you find them helpful. Recently, I found this website that gives you a production chain for you. So yeah, that's the entirety of lesson 1 down the drain. The computer will do it for you. Alright, lightning round, lesson number 8, or maybe just 7.5. Have fun with it. You're gonna get so much more out of this game if you have fun with the factory. I don't really know how to tell you how to have fun, because that depends on the person. I know that a bunch of people are gonna find fun by pressing the skip button and finding a fully formed factory. I find that boring, but if you find that fun, go for it. Go for it. But otherwise, this kind of rolls into lesson number 6, and you can kind of tell that I'm losing steam here because I'm repeating points. You have plenty of space to do your own thing, so make sure that you have fun while doing it. And with that, I think that's going to do it for the A-side. I have a couple of quick housekeeping items before you go, so if you're planning to click off here, just hold on for a moment. If you manage to get through 1 straight hour of my rambling and somehow you're like, yes, I want to see more Endfield content from this guy, sorry, I'm not doing any more. So if you're looking for another Endfield content creator, don't subscribe to this channel. I already have way too many subscribers from my first video who assume that I'm gonna be doing more gacha gaming content, and I'm not. That being said, the fact that a lot of you are not gonna subscribe, and a lot of you are gonna be clicking off, like right here, like what, 2/3 into the video? Okay, let's be honest, most people are gonna click off when I say that I'm not providing blueprints. Means that this video probably isn't gonna get a whole lot of reach. If you enjoyed this video and you thought it was helpful, I'd appreciate it if you could share it with a friend whom you think might benefit from it too. I'd love it if my semi-incoherent ramblings could help people understand this game better. That'd be great. If you don't think this video was helpful, if you think it was a waste of your time, then I would really appreciate it if you could share it with your friends and waste their time too. No, I'm kidding. If you do think this video was just a massive waste of time, then please, I would appreciate it if you gave me some feedback on how I could improve, so that if I ever want to make an informative video ever again, I could probably make it better than this one. But if your only feedback is, man, the runtime's just way too long, he rambles on for way too long, I'm sorry, I know, but just trust me when I say that it really cuts down on editing time on my end. But yeah, apart from that, see ya.